Now, your book goes on to talk about a different type of theory based on the features. So remember we looked at vision, the visual cortex has all of these, feature detectors. That's kind of like the basic lines and angles and movement and so on. So we have orientation, so the angle, say, of a shape. We have movement, size, and so on. Spatial frequency, whether a line is thick or thin. And so based on that basic idea that our visual system processes features, we can apply that idea to how we recognize objects then. So feature theories allow us to describe a pattern by listing its parts. So facial recognition involves pattern recognition, right? And your book has a nice example of describing a friend as having long blonde hair, a short nose, and bushy eyebrows. And so in the case of faces, these are the features that we're looking at. The length of the hair, the thickness of the brows, the size and shape of the nose, the size and shape of the lips, and so on. And so we can use those features to help recognize our familiar friend. So yeah, those feature detecting neurons in the visual cortex, simple cells detect orientation, complex cells detect movement, and stop detect size, spatial frequency, detect the thinness or thickness of these lines. And so here we can see that one stage of visual processing includes processing these facial features built from the simple, complex, and end-stop cells and so on from the visual cortex. We use that information to construct these features. A very handy theory is called distinctive features theory, and this one emphasizes that some features are more important in helping us recognize an object than others, and that when an object is distinctive, that is in some way that it's very helpful in helping us like recognize it and know what it is then. So zebras, for example, they're very distinctive in that they're one of the few animals, wild animals, that's black and white, right? So that would be an example of a very distinctive feature. So the idea is that all complex perceptual stimuli, including objects, are composed of these features. Distinctive features are cues that allow observers to distinguish one object from another. That's what we mean by distinctive. So Gibson proposed these criteria for what the features of an uppercase letter should be. So we're focusing on just a very simple letter. The features should be critical ones and present in some members of the set but not in others to provide a contrast. The identity of the features should remain unchanged under changes in brightness, size, and perspective. The features should yield a unique pattern for each letter. That's important too. The number of proposed features should be reasonably small. So let's apply this to the letter A. So here we can see our letter A. The features should be critical ones and present in some members of the set but not in others. So we can see that the angled lines in the A, which we see here, right, these diagonal lines. Yeah, we see these in some other letters as well. The R, the X, the Y, sorry, there we go, the Y, and so on, and the Z, and I won't do them all necessarily. But that's the idea, that the letter A shares these diagonal lines. These diagonal lines indeed remain unchanged even if we make the letter A bigger or smaller, changes color, its brightness, whatever. Those features should yield a unique pattern. So how they are arranged together then is going to be also important. That creates the pattern. So it's the two diagonal lines that meet in the top with the horizontal one in the middle. It's shown here as well. Here's our little horizontal and our two diagonals. which letters are easier to distinguish? Here, the R or the P, or the R and the C? These are harder, aren't they? Why? There are some similarities between the R and the C, but the R and the P have more overlap, don't they? The only part that's unique for the R is this little diagonal that comes out. Everything else is the same. So this one is harder to distinguish. When letters are harder to distinguish, it's challenging for children as they're learning their letters. Children learn letters more easily and with less frustration when we use a perceptual learning approach. What that does is it highlights what's unique about the R versus the P. So we know that kids are going to confuse the R and the P a little more than the R and the C because there's so much overlap in the features found in the R and the P. There's only one feature that is unique, this one, the diagonal. And that's the one that's unique to the R. If you just highlight that part that is unique by, say, putting it in a different color, it helps draw attention to it and it facilitates children's learning of their letters. Distinctive features theory suggests that pattern recognition is accomplished by mentally assessing the presence or absence of a checklist of these critical features. And so we can facilitate that process for kids by making more obvious what those critical features are. Distinctive features allow us to locate a particular object very quickly. This red flower here, yeah. So it comes out immediately, jumps out at us. Technically, we can say that it pops out. So pop out is actually a technical term. And so the red flower pops out at us and is immediately perceived without any effort. And that's because it has a very distinctive feature compared to the other items in the image. It's the only one that has that different color. So we can learn about how features pop out by putting a feature in an area against a particular type of background and sort of seeing where and how people find it, right? So first we're going to do this feature search. So we're going to just focus on this column. We're looking for the red vertical bar. Here, it definitely pops out at us very easily. Red versus the blue bars. They're all the same orientation, but there's only one red. Here, also pops out at us. It's the only one that's vertical. All the other ones are horizontal. And here it pops out as well. It's the only one that's red. Notice down here on this graph, we're measuring the reaction time in milliseconds. How long did it take the participants in this study to notice the red vertical bar? And here on the x-axis, we can compare whether there was a small number of background objects, also called distractors. Here, there's one, two, three, four. Here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and there's 9 here as well. So either 4 or 9 distractors. Reaction time is flat and about 0. In other words, participants instantly recognize and find the red vertical bar regardless of the number of distractors. Why? Because we don't have to search for it. It pops out at us. It has a unique feature in all 3 of these circumstances. Now we can think of doing this conjunction search here in the middle. This one's going to be harder. We're looking for the red vertical bar. Now notice that it's relatively easy here with few distractors, but the distractors all share something with the red vertical bar. They're either the same orientation, some of them, or they're the same color, these others. This no longer pops out at us. Here it's even a little bit harder, and here we might have to search a little bit. And what we find is that if there are 4 items versus 9 items, it takes longer for participants to find the object when there are 9 items versus when there's 4. So we're having to work for it here. And by the way, the fact that there are 2 lines is that in some of these searches there was actually a red vertical bar to find. Those are the blue lines, and in other searches it actually wasn't there, and they had to look and keep looking. So this one takes a little bit longer because there was no red vertical bar, and so they just kept on searching until they were absolutely certain that there wasn't one. But in both these cases, we can see that these lines are no longer flat like they were here in the feature search. They are now at a diagonal. And as such, it is no longer automatic. The hardest search is the spatial configuration search, where the features are the same. So what are the features for these shapes? We have a horizontal and a vertical. What do we see here? Other shapes that also have a horizontal and a vertical. And so this one's even harder and also takes effort and is not automatic. So there's this theory called feature integration theory. So we have evidence that when a feature is unique, it pops out at us and it gets processed automatically. When it's not unique, we have to spend a little bit of effort and time looking for it. And the idea is that in the brain, different features are sort of processed uniquely, and different types of features like color and shape are processed in different areas of the brain. And so we're having to sort of use, multiple areas of the brain to do this. But it also brings up an interesting question, which is how are color and shape combined? And remember, we saw this in vision as the binding problem. So if we're looking at, say, a red apple, this object has both a shape, a size, and a color, all processed by different areas of the brain that have to get binded, right, or bound to this one object. They have to be combined, and that takes a little bit of time for it to happen. In other words, it has to happen. It's not something that is already like inherently done when the visual system processes an apple. Our brains have to go to an additional step to put the different features together. And so Anne Treisman looked at how people process shape and color, for example, and she showed people very brief glimpses of these colored shapes. And she noticed that the participants sometimes reported seeing, say, for example, a green diamond, or a blue circle, or an orange square. That they saw objects that were there, but that the color was from one of the other objects. In other words, the binding process didn't happen correctly. Those two features, the color and the shape, didn't get integrated properly. And so feature integration theory states that we need to use attention to combine features such as color and shape. And if we're not paying sufficient attention, it can lead us to incorrectly combine these features. And again, in the study, they did that just by showing that to them really, really quickly. In feature integration theory, insufficient attention might also lead us to miss that the circles on the left half are a different color than on the right. Uh-oh. Yeah, if you're like me, you didn't notice. To notice that, we really have to focus our attention, and then we can quickly see it. So feature theories also provide a way of thinking about the sort of the scope and the size of these features. There are small detailed features in this picture. There are also big picture things, right? Like this pole right here that we see. Right? And so how does the mind reduce the number of possibilities so that it can sort of concentrate on one thing, especially when there are a lot of things to look at? Well, partial answer is that we start with the big picture, the global features, and progress eventually to the more local ones, and then pick out the individual human beings, for example, in this picture. But we first see the big things, the street, the giant neon signs on the buildings, right? And rather than individual people, the crowd. Those are the global features here. So very quickly, find the letter H. That was probably pretty quick. Now find the letter U. The letter H here is a global feature. It's big picture. The U is local. We have this letter L made out of these shapes that correspond to the letter U. So this gets us to what's called the global superiority effect. We tend to see the whole object first. The properties of the whole object take precedence and get processed first over the parts of the object. We see the big picture first.